What is going on, Diablo 2 fans? Dobrunsky here, and I have to admit I am very excited for today's video. I have compiled 14 different variations of melee builds, and I've basically compressed multiple Chaos Sanctuary runs to sort of determine or rank what is the best melee build in patch 2.4. Now, when I use the word best, that's very subjective because, a spoiler here, one of the characters that performed the poorest has also, in my personal experience, given me one of the fastest Uber Tristram runs. So I want to make that very clear. It's a very subjective list. I'll cover sort of the parameters of the testing, but again, 14 different build iterations, and I kind of compared the clear speeds between all of them and averaged everything out. So we're talking 5 runs per character times 14 different iterations to get an average Chaos Sanctuary runtime. So it was pretty interesting, the results. Hopefully you guys enjoy this video. Again, a ton of work went into it. And just a quick reminder before we jump in, just want to let you guys know that if you do enjoy my YouTube content, I do stream twice a week on Twitch. Got the link for my Twitch channel in the description below, so any follows on that platform would be very much appreciated. That being said, guys, let's jump in. So there's a few things I want to cover before I jump into the results of this video, and the first is that I'm not going to showcase the gear for every single build. Like I mentioned, I tested 14 different iterations, so in order to have all the builds be somewhat on an equal playing field, they all had the same inventory. So they had the unique class torch, Anti-Charm, no Tomb of Identify or Hydra Cube, anything like that. It was just 3 20-20 small charms, so 3 max damage, 20 to attack rating, and 20 life small charms with 10 max damage, 75 to attack rating, 45 to life grand charm. So again, it is a perfect inventory, so very hard to achieve gear, but it was the same for every single build. So whether it was, Shapeshifting Druid, ranged Boson, Throw Barb, Whirlwind Barb, etc., they all had that same inventory. And then I tried to use the same jewelry. So every single build here had High Lords, a Ravenfrost ring, and a Dual Leech ring, a String of Ears belt, Fortitude or Enigma for some of the teleporting or non-teleporting variants, and then again the best in-slot weapon for each choice. So it shifted a little bit for like the Reaper's Toll Wolf, or Reaper's Wolf, whatever, had Eth Reaper's Toll. Whirlwind Barb was Dual Grief. My Kixin had Stormlash with a Shield Rune, but there was just like a lot of different iterations, so it's way too many to cover. But again, I went over a Reaper Wolf, a Throw Barb with a Pride Mercenary, Throw Barb with a Faith Mercenary, Strafe Windforce, Strafe Faith, Multi-Shot Faith, Multi-Shot Windforce, Benzon, Maul Werebear, a Zealer, Frenzy Barb, Whirlwind Barb, a running Fortitude version, Whirlwind Barb, a teleporting version, and then a Dragon Talon Assassin. So a lot of different iterations to cover. Again, way too much to go over the gear for each individual build. So that's the first thing I want to cover. The second is that I really want to stress the word, defining the best. It is very subjective because, like I mentioned, this is going to be a Chaos Sanctuary Players 3 full clear speed, and the run actually starts the second the character enters the Chaos Sanctuary, and then the timer goes off, and then I made sure I did full clears. And again, some characters, performed very poorly, but then again, they did very well against bosses. Some other Barb iterations, like the Frenzy, seemed like it was a bit stronger than Whirlwind, but then if you were to do like a Bale run versus Chaos Sanctuary, Whirlwind would be a lot better. So there's very kind of subjective in terms of how you want to sort of rank these. I just want to make that very clear. But that kind of covers all the build iterations, and then sort of the subjective nature of the test, determining like what is best. And then again, P3, full chaos clears, and the timer entered as soon as the character entered the Chaos Sanctuary. And then I did 5 individual chaos runs for each build. This was to try and average out sort of, some anomalies like really funky mercenary AI. If I happen to run into a weird like physical immune monster that I couldn't break, like some characters like a Barb can berserk, others with the Reaper's Toll Mercenary, they maybe couldn't break. It was just to try and get an overall average of everything. Now I know what you're going to say, 5 runs isn't really enough to do a fair test, and I would agree with that, but I mean, 14 different builds, 5 chaos runs each, averaging the time. I think it gives a pretty good picture. Might change a little bit, a little bit of variation here or there for each times, but I do think the list is pretty accurate. So that's everything I wanted to cover. Again, let me know in the comment section below if you guys think I missed anything was wrong with the test, or if you would change anything, but let's jump into the results. So let's kick things off by talking about the Druid, my favorite class in D2. You can do everything, summon Druid, elemental damage, as well as shapeshifting. Very cool all-around build, sort of the jack of all trades, master of none. Now I tested 2 variations. The first was a Reaper Wolf, so this is a Fury Druid using Eth Reaper's Toll. It has the advantage of being able to wield a Pride Mercenary and consistent, reliable Decrep procs. That's one of the few things that I think people overlook with this build, is that the consistency of the Decrep proc is very powerful. Now over the course of 5 chaos runs, again, every single build here is on player 3 difficulty, I averaged a complete clear speed time of about 4 minutes and 5 seconds. So I thought that was actually pretty powerful for a build that can't really get around very well. I mean, you do have Feral Rage, that is good, but compared to teleporting variants, it's just not there. But imagine a teleporting wolf. I definitely think you could get the times even lower, and I think you would probably get the best or close to the best of this group setup. But I thought 4 minutes and 5 seconds average was pretty good. The Maul Werebear is a little bit of a different story. So this is a very tanky character, uninterruptible attack, very high defense, great stun from Maul and Shockwave, but it's a very slow build. You don't have anything to run around quicker. Again, you can't teleport, great strength and mobility, but I averaged 5 minutes across the board for 5 Maul Werebear runs of Chaos Sanctuary. So definitely a little bit slower, but I thought it was interesting that the Reaper Wolf was about a full minute faster than the Werebear counterpart. So the next character that I want to cover is the Barbarian. Now, 2 of the results I sort of expected to land where they did. The other 2, I feel like they kind of underperformed. Again, that's just my take. I will say, starting off with the underperforming builds, it was obviously the Throw Barb. I do think that in patch 2.4, it has been significantly improved with the way you can recover throw quantity through the throw mastery. It's a lot better build now. Doing back-to-back runs with the Pride Mercenary setup and a Faith Mercenary setup, I want to mention that I was using Eth Lacerator, Eth Warstrike, and then I tried a variant with a Pride Merc, and I tried a variant with a Faith Mercenary. I didn't run out of throw quantity, so that was kind of huge. Now, as far as the clear speed results go, the Throw Barb Pride Mercenary setup, over 5 Chaos rounds, I averaged about 5 minutes and 40 seconds. That's significantly slower than the Druid setups. And the Throw Barb with the Faith Mercenary setup, which this is interesting because a lot of people have, I guess, crunched numbers and they said that they think the Faith is the best, actually had about a 13-second average clear speed longer. So I was hovering around about 5 minutes and 55 seconds for an average runtime with the Throw Barb with the Faith setup, excuse me. So honestly, not really too much of a difference between the 2. They're within 10 seconds of each other. And again, the Flea proc from Lacerator was kind of annoying. That maybe slowed down a little bit. Definitely better than what it was, but kind of clear to me here to an extent it is definitely underperforming. Now the other standard variants, I tested a Frenzy Barb setup with Fortitude. This was a really solid setup. I actually maxed out Berserk to add additional magic synergy damage to Frenzy. And I averaged a 3 minute and 35 second runtime over 5 runs. And the 2 other counterparts that I tested was a standard Whirlwind Barbarian setup using Fortitude, and then a standard Whirlwind Barbarian setup, but I just switched the armor and used Enigma for teleport. So I averaged about 4 minutes and 15 seconds for a running Whirlwind Barbarian, and 3 minutes and 12 seconds for a Whirlwind teleporting Barb. So basically have now 2 better ranking characters than the Shapeshifting Druid setup. So Whirlwind Tele Barb is now the highest rank so far, and Frenzy Barb slightly below that. So was pretty interesting. Again, I thought that the movement speed from Frenzy would definitely outperform a Fortitude Whirlwind Barb, but then that teleport repositioning with Whirlwind, it actually was a hair faster than Frenzy. And again, the throw counterparts were definitely subpar, but I guess there is advantages attacking from a range, but they definitely perform significantly worse than the Whirlwind and Frenzy counterparts. So the next character that I'm going to cover is the Amazon. Now I went over 5 different build iterations, a lot of different combinations, so I want to just clarify, when I mention a Faith Amazon setup, the Amazon herself, she's using a Faith Runeward, and then I'm pairing that with an Act 2 Might Aura Mercenary with Pride, so you get the Concentration and Might Aura counterparts. And then when I talk about a Wind Force setup, that's when the Amazon is using Wind Force, then I have an Act 1 Faith Mercenary. So I covered those different build setups with Strafe, Multi-Shot, and then I finished everything up with Fend. Now, the results were kind of interesting for the range setup. So starting off with the Strafe Wind Force setup, I averaged about 4 minutes and 30 seconds. I was using Guided Arrow for single targets and then just strafing with this combination, again for 4 minutes 30 second average time. Then the Faith setup was slightly faster, about 15 seconds on average. Now, again, probably over the course of, like, if you were to do like 20 or 30 runs, I bet you would probably end up with the same average time. But I thought it was interesting that it was 4 minutes and 30 seconds for a Strafe Wind Force setup, and then 4 minutes and 15 seconds for Strafe Faith setup. And then when I switched to Multi-Shot, the Faith setup was about 4 minutes and 23 seconds average over 5 runs, which that kind of made me think, well, if it's very similar to the Strafe setup, the Multi-Shot Wind Force setup will be very similar as well. This was not the case. All those range setups were very similar, but the Multi-Shot Wind Force setup, I averaged 3 minutes and 43 seconds over 5 runs. So very similar, except for Multi-Shot Wind Force seemed to perform the best. Now, I do want to mention that when you're comparing a melee build like a shapeshifting druid, you're a lot more susceptible to the effects of Decrep. It really kind of slows you down, and versus a ranged, multi-shot wind force setup where you can hang way back and destroy monsters before they get a chance to cast Decrep on you. So I wanted to make that distinction clear that there is a little bit of an advantage here for ranged setups. I kind of debated even including ranged physical damage characters, whether or not you guys were going to consider it melee, but just thought it would make for a better test. But I do want to point out that if you were to, say, escalate it to players 8 difficulty, I do think some builds like the Zealot, Whirlwind Barbarian, or a Reaper Wolf would perform faster than the Bozon counterpart. So I want to make that very clear. And then, of course, wrapping everything up, I have the Fends on. So this was a build that nobody ever played because there was this stupid lock animation between the dodge, evade skills, and then we're using Fend, but that was fixed in patch 2.4. So it's a relatively cheap build. With a decent hard-hitting spear, you can get pretty good damage. And I averaged, with the Fens on, 4 minutes and 53 seconds. So similar to a Maul Werebear, slower than a Reaper Wolf, but then slower than Frenzy and Whirlwind setup. So was kind of interesting that the Zealot version of an Amazon is significantly slower than the top-tier ranged counterparts. So the second last build I'm going to cover is the worst performing build, and that is the Dragon Talon kicks in. So I didn't want to jump into the martial arts like Phoenix Strike because I feel like that sort of blends the line of elemental damage or melee, but if I'm just kicking from the boots only, Dragon Talon, I thought it was okay. So I went with a setup that netted me one of the fastest Uber times I've ever had, and that is using an Infinity Mercenary, Stormlash. So you're kicking very frequently, you're proccing static fields, so you get decent AoE. And I was just running around kicking. Again, you could go with like Death Sentry variants, but again, that sort of doesn't really border on melee anymore. But I had an average runtime of 6 minutes and 30 seconds with the kicks in. So it was really interesting that full clear speed, this was the worst performing build, but for Ubers, it's a very good performing build. I mean, kind of similar to like a Smiter. Smiter does very well in Ubers, but if you're doing single target smiting, knocking back monsters at Chaos Sanctuary, you would expect a very slow time. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And then, of course, the final build that I'm going to cover is the Zealot. And I only went over a Fortitude charging version because the Enigma version, I don't think teleporting versus charging and then sacrificing the damage, there'd be too much of a clear speed difference there. Sort of similar to like a teleporting variant of a Frenzy Barb. So I just only covered a running or charging Zealot. And I averaged 3 minutes and 45 seconds. So very powerful character using Grief, Fanaticism, hard-hitting Mercenary. I could have maybe squeaked out a little bit of a faster time with an Enigma variant, but again, kind of ran out of time for this video. So 3 minutes and 45 seconds for a very good, respectable time, but actually a tad bit slower than a Tele Whirlwind Barbarian variant. So that, in a nutshell, guys, wraps up me testing 14 different build variations, doing P3 Chaos Sanctuary runs, full clear speed. So it kind of, if anything are the standout here, I think that Throw Barb and maybe a change to a Kicks in wouldn't be a bad idea. If you could kind of up the damage range of boots maybe for a Kicks in. I'm not quite sure with the Throw Barb, maybe a little bit more damage from the Mastery. Those were definitely the standouts of poor performing builds. And I think the biggest standout surprise build for me was Multi-Shot Wind Force. That was actually a very good performing build. And again, guys, take this testing with a grain of salt because, like I mentioned, specific builds that might not have performed as well here would do very well in Bale running or Uber Tristram, for example. So it's not kind of an end-all, be-all list, but I think it is a pretty good overall gauge of encompassing everything, so including a boss kill, Diablo, full clear speed, movement, sort of like an overall basis of melee. Looks like a teleporting Whirlwind Barb is number 1. Shortly behind that would be Frenzy and a Zealot setup. So pretty interesting. Again, let me know in the comment section below if you guys enjoyed this video, if you liked it. You maybe like to see something similar for a caster setup, maybe a Bale run speed test or something. Any feedback is always welcome as well, as long as you're not a dick. I want to emphasize that. Any positive feedback is fine. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. I'll catch you on my next one or my next live stream. Peace out.